"Your cooking is disgusting." I will never forget those words for as long as I live. That evening, at dinner, the moment my daughter-in-law saw the beef stew I had made, she pinched her nose and said them. And then, without anyone having so much as touched a fork to it, she silently dumped the entire pot into the garbage can. My 5-year-old grandson stared up at my face, his eyes wide with confusion. I couldn't say a thing. I couldn't do a thing. I just remember the wooden spoon in my hand, how it trembled. That night, my son and his wife came to my room. "Mom," my son began, "we were thinking, maybe it would be best if you went to stay somewhere else for a while. For the sake of the child's health, it's just not working out with all of us. Living together like this." I nodded silently. I had a feeling that the more I fought, the more pathetic I would seem. Maybe they were right. Perhaps their reasons were valid. I tried to convince myself of that, tried to make myself believe it. But the moment I stepped out of the house, clutching my belongings packed into plastic grocery bags as the rain fell around me, my heart understood the truth. I hadn't just left, I had been kicked out. With nowhere to go, I found a cheap motel near the train station. I handed my ID to the young man at the front desk. My shoulders were soaked and cold, and I felt as if I were a person nobody in the world needed. But then, the very next day, after just one night had passed, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my daughter-in-law and my son. Both of them were pale, their faces drawn, and they were holding something in their hands. The moment I opened the door, they, without a word, fell to their knees on the ground before me. "Mom, we are so sorry." Inside me, I felt something quietly shatter, and then, slowly, I felt it begin to piece itself back together. To explain what could have possibly happened in a single night, I have to go back a little to tell you about my past and the story of this family. My name is Evelyn Miller. I turned 75 this year. When I was younger, I worked for over 30 years as a cook at a daycare center. Every day, I was sustained by the smiles of children telling me my food was delicious. My husband passed away 10 years ago, and since then, I have been living with my only son and his family. I still remember that day with perfect clarity. The night my husband left this world, after I had turned off every light in the house, I found I couldn't bring myself to turn off the one in the kitchen. Next to the coffee maker sat a small bowl of his favorite tomato soup, still warm. I ladled some into a bowl for myself and gently reheated it. I wasn't doing it for anyone in particular, my hands just moved on their own, following a routine they knew by heart. And as the steam rose quietly from the soup, the words slipped out of my mouth before I could stop them. "Would you like some more?" My own voice floated in the silent kitchen, and I bit my lip, startled. Perhaps I was the one most surprised by a question no one would ever answer again. Ever since that night, even when I eat dinner alone, I find myself setting out my husband's plate and silverware. It's as if I feel, somewhere deep down, that he might walk through the door at any moment and say, "I'm home." I receive very little in Social Security benefits. The reason is simple. I was never a full-time employee, just a part-time worker for all those years. So now, my life depends on the small savings I managed to put away over the decades, and on the warmth of my family. I never asked for luxury. A mattress in the corner of a room, a bowl of soup to eat, and a quiet moment to read a book at night. I thought that was more than enough. Just having a place to belong is happiness. That's what I truly believed. My son's wife was polite to me in the beginning. She used respectful words and a kind tone. But as the months and years passed, a distance grew between us. The look in her eyes turned cold. One day, something happened. I was standing in the kitchen, and she walked in and said, "Evelyn, isn't that knife getting pretty old? I'm just a little worried about germs." I laughed it off. "Oh, this old thing and I go way back," I replied. But in that instant, I felt a sharp sting deep in my chest. Still, I tried not to let it bother me. I decided the best way to keep the peace in the family was to stay out of the way, to be as quiet and unobtrusive as possible. I had one daily ritual that I never missed. It was to make breakfast for the family, first thing in the morning. scrambled eggs, toast, some homemade pickles. I always used fresh ingredients, trying to create the same simple, gentle flavors I had made for years. At the very least, I want our meals to be warm and full of love. I would think to myself as I got up at 4:30 every morning, quietly rinsing the rice and brewing the coffee. But, somewhere along the way, that gentle kindness started to be seen as meddling and unhygienic. The small space in the kitchen where I kept my cooking utensils gradually shrank. My old knife was replaced with a new, shiny one. The jars of pickles I made were pushed to the back of the refrigerator, where no one ever touched them. I pretended not to notice. I pretended I didn't see, pretended I didn't hear. But my heart was slowly wearing down, bit by bit. I still remember one morning, as I was serving breakfast, I remarked softly, "It feels like fall is just around the corner." No one answered me. Even so, I told myself, it's all right. As long as the family is healthy and happy, that's all that matters. That's what I kept telling myself, until that night. I live with my son and his wife now. We're in a small, two-bedroom apartment in a suburb of Chicago. They let me put a mattress on the floor in a corner of the den, and that has become my room. The kitchen is small, but I've always loved kitchens. The sound of a knife on a cutting board, the aroma of something simmering on the stove, the warm, steamy air. For me, that is the very proof of being alive. But I wonder when it started. When did her eyes, my daughter-in-law's eyes, begin to look upon my cooking with such coldness? It started with small things. She would look at the pot roast I'd made and say, "Oh, I'm on a diet," and not touch it. She would take a sip of the chicken soup, push the bowl away, and murmur politely, "It might be a little too salty." I didn't let it bother me at first. Tastes are different for everyone, and maybe my sense of seasoning wasn't as sharp as it used to be. But then came the day a small seed of doubt was planted in my mind. That morning, I had been simmering a hearty beef stew since dawn and had also made a big plate of scrambled eggs, my grandson's favorite. When I set the food on the table and called out, "Breakfast is ready," I thought I saw a quick, meaningful glance pass between my son and his wife in the living room. My daughter-in-law put on a smile, but she leaned over and whispered something in my son's ear. My son, in turn, looked a little troubled but said nothing. A small, sharp thorn of unease pricked my heart, but I swallowed it down. It was around the time she stopped eating my food that I noticed a change in my son's eyes too. They became distant, somehow evasive. He would sit at the dinner table and not even pick up his fork for the stew I'd served, just sipping his water. If our eyes met, he no longer smiled the way he used to. His gaze was replaced with something that looked like indifference. "How is it? Is the seasoning okay?" I finally worked up the courage to ask him one night. All I got in return was a vague, "Yeah, it's fine." Even that single phrase sounded like an obligation. You know, when he was younger, he would come home from work and say, "Mom, your cooking is the best thing in the world." Every time I heard those words, I felt like my hard work for the day had been worth it. But now, why did that one simple word, delicious, feel so impossibly far away? It was as if he was sitting right in front of me, but his heart had turned its back completely. I grew afraid of that look in his eyes, and gradually, I stopped trying to make conversation at all. Before I knew it, our relationship had shifted from mother and son to something more like strangers living in the same house. One evening after dinner, I was in the kitchen cleaning up. That's when I saw them, in the sink, underneath some other dishes. Were the untouched scrambled eggs from that morning? "Oh, I guess he didn't like them," I whispered to myself, but my hands stopped moving. I felt as if my very existence was being quietly rejected. I remembered the night my husband died. Sitting alone in the kitchen, illuminated only by the single light over the stove, warming a bowl of soup, I had instinctively asked the empty room, "Would you like some more?" The loneliness of that moment, of a kitchen that would never answer, came rushing back to me now. What is my purpose in this house, I wondered? Am I just a presence, here to quietly grow old? Or am I no longer even considered family? Still, I said nothing. because I was afraid that if I put those fears into words, it would push them even further away. So I had no choice but to continue, pretending I didn't notice. But that small thorn was lodged deep inside me. Slowly, that thorn began to ache, and soon it would move my entire world. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. When I turned over, I felt no one else's presence. The whole apartment was still, wrapped in a profound silence. I slowly slipped out from under my blankets and made my way to the kitchen. Only the dim light from the refrigerator clock illuminated the room. I sat down in my usual chair. My husband and I used to sit here together. I can still see his face, how he'd take a sip of soup and smile, saying, "A little heavy on the salt tonight, Ev." But on this night, there was no sound at all. Only the steady, indifferent ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the passage of time. I placed my hands on my knees and whispered into the darkness, Am I really allowed to be here?" It wasn't a question directed at anyone. It was a doubt that had simply spilled out from the deepest part of my heart. All this time, I had lived my life thinking only of not being a burden. But maybe that wasn't the same thing as being welcome. My voice didn't reach anyone. And yet, the feelings I had tried to convince myself didn't need to be heard were now, in the quiet dark, beginning to stir. That evening, I decided to make my grandson's favorite dish, pan-seared cod with lemon and herbs. The warm, savory aroma filled the kitchen, a welcome comfort against the crisp October air that had started to settle in. "He'll be so happy today," I thought to myself as I quietly plated the food in my corner of the kitchen. On the table, I had arranged the seared cod, steamed green beans, buttered turnips, and a basket of warm, crusty bread. When it was time, I went to the living room to call everyone. "Dinner is ready." There was no reply. A few moments later, my grandson, my son, and she walked into the kitchen. But in that instant, she wrinkled her nose, brought a hand up to cover it, and said, "Ugh, that fish stinks." The words were supposedly aimed at the fish sizzling in the pan. But to me, it felt as if she were saying the smell was coming from my own body. In that split second, her eyes met mine. It was a look that condemned not the food, but the person who had made it. These hands, which had cooked for hundreds of children at the daycare center for so many years, were now being judged as filthy. I couldn't say anything back. I swallowed my words and just stared at the steam rising from the plate. I felt something inside me break, just one small but definite crack. I can't believe you would feed something that smells like this to a child. Then, without any hesitation, she grabbed all the dishes from the table and swept them into a large plastic trash bag. "That's enough. I'll cook from now on." No words came out. My hands were trembling, my body frozen, as I watched the scene unfold. The steam was still rising from the food in the bag, but it all felt like a distant memory. But the thing that squeezed my heart the tightest was this: my son, who had been watching the whole time, said nothing. He just kept fiddling with the television remote. "Aren't you going to say anything?" My son silently picked up the remote and turned off the TV. He then glanced over at me for just a moment. In his eyes, I saw it clearly. A look of pure annoyance, as if to say, "Great, look at the trouble you've caused now." My mind flashed back to when he was a little boy. The time he had a high fever, and I stayed up all night changing the cool coifs on his forehead. The night before his school field trip, when I stayed up late packing all his favorite snacks into his lunchbox. The memory of his small body hugging me tightly, his face beaming as he said, "Thank you, Mom." Is it possible that inside him, none of those memories remain? With that single glance, I understood. I was no longer his mother. I was just an elderly woman living in his house. I felt a part of my soul turn cold, as if an invisible line had been silently drawn. I wanted to scream. But I knew if I opened my mouth, I would start to cry, though I just bit my lip. Only my grandson's small eyes darted back and forth between me and the discarded food. Just then, my grandson, who had been watching quietly from the corner of the room, whispered in a tiny voice, "I wanted to eat Grandma's dinner." His voice was small, but it reached my heart, loud and clear. In that tense, broken air, it was the only gentle, soft thing left. His voice was small, but it reached my heart, loud and clear. I couldn't help but turn to look. My grandson, Jason, kept his head down, but he glanced up at me for just a second before closing his mouth tight. And in that moment, it was as if a tiny flame flickered to life deep inside my chest. No matter how much the adults pushed me away, inside this little boy, the memory of Grandma's cooking was still alive. That single thought was just enough to let me believe, if only for a moment, that I still existed. "Thank you, sweet boy," I whispered, not with my voice, but with my heart. I slowly knelt and began to wipe up the spilled sauce, one smear at a time. The oily sheen of the lemon and butter spread across the floor, looking just like the shame spreading through my own heart. The dishcloth in my hand trembled, a tiny, uncontrollable tremor. "It's not because I'm cold or angry," I thought, looking down at my own hands. Wrinkled, the knuckles swollen and bumpy, these were the hands that had cooked for my family for decades. And now, they were shaking. I tried to still them, but I couldn't. "Oh, I've gotten old." It was the first time I had ever truly felt it. It wasn't a sad feeling, not exactly, but a profound loneliness washed over me, a feeling of being pushed out to some far, distant place. "Is there any reason for me to be here anymore?" I whispered the words to myself, so quietly that no one could hear. Later that night, I stood alone at the kitchen sink, slowly washing the last of the dishes. As I wiped the leftover sauce from a plate, a memory came flooding back. Robert, my husband, back when he was still healthy, smiling as he ate this very same cod, telling me how delicious it was. Michael, when he was in grade school, asking for a third helping. "The recipe hasn't changed a bit," I murmured to the empty room. I had always tried to live my life in a way that wouldn't make anyone dislike me, but somewhere along the way, I had become someone they didn't even bother to explain why they disliked. When I reached up to put a plate in the cabinet, I caught a glimpse of my own face in the reflection of the glass. It looked like the face of a stranger. "That fish stinks." Those words, like a knife, stabbed at my heart again and again. I will never, ever forget what happened that night. After dinner was over, my son, Michael, and his wife, Susan, came and stood in the doorway of my little corner of the den. They didn't knock. Susan just opened the door and was the first to speak. "We need you to leave tomorrow." At first, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What?" she continued, her voice flat. "It's better for us to be a family of 3. We don't want you to be a bad influence on Jason." In her hand, she was holding my old rollerboard suitcase. It was a faded maroon bag I used to use years ago when I had to travel for family funerals. "Wait, hold on, what are you saying?" My voice was barely a whisper, but Michael cut me off, his tone low and final. "It's already been decided." "I'm sorry, Mom." "Sorry? What could that one word possibly mean now?" Susan added, "Your cooking is unhygienic, Evelyn. Honestly, I've been feeling sick. We can't have Jason eating it." I couldn't even stand up. I just sat there on my mattress, forced to absorb their words. Tucked away in the back of the hall closet, there was one thing I kept that I never wanted anyone to touch. It was a small, fabric-covered trunk from the last trip Robert and I ever took together to a little bed and breakfast in Vermont. On the drive home from that trip, we had laughed and promised each other, "We'll do this again soon." But we never got the chance. I had carefully packed away the memories of that trip inside it, folding them up gently, and had even locked the trunk, never intending to open it again. But on that night, there it was, sitting in the middle of the living room floor. It had been pried open. My clothes were shoved inside haphazardly, and a luggage tag was tied crudely around the handle. "You can take this with you tomorrow," Susan said. In that moment, something inside of me shattered. The precious box that held the last journey I ever took with my husband had now been turned into the tool of my eviction. After they left the room, I couldn't move for a long time. I stared at the packed trunk, praying somewhere in my mind, "Please let this be a dream. Let me wake up." But it wasn't a dream. It was past 10 o'clock when I finally walked to the front door, without a coat or an umbrella. I didn't even realize it was raining until I was outside. In the umbrella stand by the door, there was a single long black umbrella. It was the one Robert had used. The handle was a little worn, but it was familiar to me. The one I always reached for on rainy days. Without thinking, I reached for it. Just this one thing, I thought. Surely I can take this. In that instant. Oh, that belongs to the house. The voice came from behind me. It was Susan. Cold. The words weren't angry, just administrative. I froze, then slowly put the umbrella back in its stand. Her words felt like a formal declaration. You are no longer a member of this family. It was as if I was being told I wasn't even allowed to take a single umbrella, that my presence had already been reduced to that of an unwanted object. I said nothing. I just turned away from the stand, and without another look back, I stepped out into the rain. As the cold drops hit my cheeks, I finally understood. This was real. The moment I stepped outside, the cold rain hit my face. It felt as if someone, somewhere above, was punishing me. I pulled the collar of my thin sweater up, but the wind slipped past it, chilling my skin. The sidewalk was already dark and wet, and my shoes were soaked through in minutes. As I walked, I started to think, what did I do that was so wrong? Making their meals, cleaning the house, smiling at my grandson, saying, "Have a good day," when they left in the morning. Which one of those things was a sin so terrible that it deserved this punishment? The rain just kept falling, cold and silent on my shoulders. People hurried past under their umbrellas, but I walked alone, carrying every memory I had. The rain that night held a lonely silence, as if there was no one left in the world who even acknowledged my existence. I dragged the small suitcase down the hill from our house. The sound of its wheels, thump, 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 was swallowed by the sound of the rain, as if my very presence was being erased, unnoticed by anyone. I'm not needed in this house anymore, I thought, and the feeling tightened around my chest like a vice. I spent the night in the gazebo of a nearby park. My body was soaked and shivering. I sat on the wooden bench and tried to close my eyes, but the cold and the pain in my heart kept me awake. Where did I go wrong? I asked myself over and over, clutching a handkerchief in my trembling hands. It was a handkerchief Jason had given me for Mother's Day when he was in preschool. In the corner, he had embroidered a little handprint and the words, "I love Grandma." The sight of it made the tears finally come. He loved me, I thought. He was the one person who still loved me. Jarkus. But even that tiny spark of light seemed impossibly far away now. As the sky began to lighten, I slowly stood up. I brushed the dampness from my clothes and made a decision. I was done waiting for someone else to need me. I had to stand on my own 2 feet. And I would never, ever go back to that house. Looking back, I could see the porch light was still on. A pale yellow glow, hazy in the rain and the pre-dawn darkness. Under that light, we once had a dinner table where a family of 3 sat together. Michael's voice telling me my soup was delicious. Jason's smile, the first time he used chopsticks by himself, and the back of my husband Robert as he sat quietly reading the newspaper. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that none of it would ever come back. For a second, my feet wouldn't move. A flicker of hope, a thought that maybe I could go back, crossed my mind. But then a cold gust of wind hit my face and brought me back to reality. That door might still be unlocked. But it was just a door. It wasn't a place for me anymore. There was no reason to knock, and no one waiting for me inside. "Goodbye," I whispered, not aloud but in my heart. That night, I kept walking until I found a small, nondescript motel near the highway. It wasn't expensive, and the room was tiny, but it was enough. I just needed a place to be alone and gather my thoughts. I slid my suitcase under the bed as if to hide it, and then lay down and stared at the ceiling. I knew if I didn't get a grip on myself, something inside me would break for good. I went down to the motel's small business center and sat at one of the computers. I began to compose an email. The words were short, quiet, but they held the weight of years of endurance. I would have preferred never to send this. But if you don't remember what it feels like to hurt someone, you are bound to do it again. Then, I attached 3 PDF files. The first was a copy of my bank statement. It showed a balance of exactly $4,800. Money I had painstakingly saved over the years, never touching it, putting it aside for an emergency. The second was a copy of the deed to the house I had just been thrown out of. I had used $54,000 of my own savings as the down payment. The title was originally in my name. The third file was an audio recording of our conversation from that night. My smartwatch had recorded everything. That house was for Michael, I had always told myself. It was for his family. T. And because I felt that way, I had never told them the title had once been solely in my name. When he got married, I wanted to help them start their new life. I took all of my savings, every penny, and the life insurance money Robert had left me, and I bought the land and built that house. But I never wanted it to be a favor they owed me. I truly believed that family was about supporting one another without expecting anything in return. I never, ever dreamed that my kindness would one day become the rope used to strangle me. The night they told me to get out, I walked out of the house that was legally mine without a single word of protest. The moment I stepped over the threshold, I heard something quietly break deep inside me. Oh, I realized. In giving my son a home, I had given away my own place in the world. And that was why I had to send the email. My finger hovered over the send button, and for a moment, it trembled. Is this really the right thing to do? I asked myself, staring at the screen, but my mind was made up. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just wanted to no longer allow anyone to trample on my existence. To be told the food I made with love was filthy. To be kicked out of the home I had built. To have years of care and affection dismissed as a nuisance. I needed to bring a quiet end to that reality. The instant I clicked send, I felt a knot in my chest finally loosen. This is for the best, I whispered, and took a deep breath. I did it so that everything I had kept silent about would not end in silence. The subject line of the email was just 2 words. For your records. The body of the message contained nothing else. Not a single word. No anger. No resentment. No explanation. Just the attached files and one more line I had added at the bottom. Who do you think paid for this house? That was all. It was more powerful than shouting, more damning than 100 excuses. It was a quiet, cold, inescapable fact. The truth I had held back for so many years had finally been delivered. I was certain that as they read it, their hands would be shaking. And for the first time, they would truly remember me. It was a silence far heavier than any angry words could ever be. After sending the email, I felt hollowed out. Not sad, not triumphant, just quiet. I went back to my room and lay down on the bed, feeling as if I were finally checking out of a life that wasn't mine. The first response came early the next morning. When I woke up and looked at my phone, I had over 30 missed calls. The phone kept ringing, and then the emails and text messages started pouring in. I just looked at the screen, at the flood of notifications, and I thought, does this mean I'm finally a person they can't throw away now? I never wanted them to think I was indispensable. I just wanted, once, to hear them say, "We're sorry for what we did." That night, I realized, for the first time, I had finally presented myself not as a shadow in their home, but as a person with a right to exist. The next evening, I was still spending the time quietly in my motel room. I had just poured a little bit of hot tea into a mug and was staring blankly out the window at the sky, which was clearing after the rain, when there was a knock at the door. Startled, I walked over to the door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a familiar shape, a familiar back. When I opened the door, my son and his wife were standing there. Both of them were deathly pale. They had dark circles under their eyes, and it was obvious they hadn't slept at all. And then, my son, Michael, slowly sank to his knees. His wife, Susan, bowed her head deeply before me. "I'm so sorry, Mom. We were so wrong." Her voice was trembling and large. Heavy tears began to fall from her eyes. I just watched them in silence. I didn't yell back at them. I didn't scold them. I just quietly sat down in the chair by the window. After a long moment of silence, I finally spoke. You know, I'm too old to have the energy to be angry with you anymore. They both looked up. They seemed to be desperately trying to understand the meaning of my words. It's just, if the thing my grandson remembers when he's older isn't his, Grandma's cooking, but the words his mother said that night, when I think about that, it just makes me sad. There were no tears in my eyes. Instead, I'm sure that a quiet sorrow had seeped into the deep wrinkles I'd earned over so many years. They were quiet for a while, unable to say a thing. I just don't have the youth in me to be angry anymore. As I said the words quietly, I saw both of them flinch. My voice wasn't loud at all, but each word seemed to echo slowly, as if sinking into the empty spaces of a hollowed-out heart. What truly makes me sad is this, I said, my gaze drifting softly toward the hallway beyond the door. It's the thought that my grandson might not remember the taste of his Grandma's food but will instead remember those words his mother said that day. That is the saddest thing of all. I felt as if I could see a small figure standing at the other end of that empty motel hallway. The image of that little boy, staring back at me in silence, even though I knew it was just a figment of my imagination. I couldn't look away for a long time. A hurtful word can last longer than a loving memory. Children are like that, and because they are, that was the one thing I absolutely had to tell them. In the silence, I slowly stood up and picked up a paper bag I had placed in the corner of the room. Inside were a small sweater I had recently knitted and a handwritten recipe notebook. Please, just make sure you give this to Jason. I handed it to her, and Susan took it with both hands, then bowed her head deeply once more. I'm truly so sorry. Her voice was so quiet, so weak. It was as if she were a completely different person from the one who had wounded me so deeply. I nodded, and I thought to myself, an apology can't turn back time. But maybe, just maybe, it can be the key that unlocks a heart. And so, while I hadn't forgiven anything yet, I decided that at the very least, I wouldn't close the door on them. Not completely. Outside, the light of the setting sun was streaming in. It seemed to illuminate everything with a quiet, gentle glow. Without a word, I set out 3 mugs on the small table. I opened the lid of the electric kettle, and as I poured the steaming water for the tea, I noticed that my own hand was trembling slightly. But I tried to hide it, taking a deep breath before I spoke. Have some tea before you go. My voice sounded as if I were simply offering hospitality to a visitor. Without blaming them, without questioning them, I just gently placed a mug in front of each of them. Just then, as Susan's trembling hand reached for the mug, her fingertips brushed against mine for a fraction of a second. She took a short, sharp breath and kept her eyes downcast as she mumbled something under her breath. Grandma, you're still so kind. It sounded like a private thought she didn't want anyone to hear, but at the same time, it felt like a wish she desperately wanted someone, anyone, to receive. Yeah, I didn't say anything. I just took a handkerchief from my pocket and gently offered it to her. She took it with both hands, biting her lip as fresh tears began to fall, one after another. My son, who had been watching all of this, remained silent. His head bowed as he reached for his own tea. When was the last time he drank tea that I had made for him? The memory surfaced from a distant fog. The aroma of the tea slowly filled the small room. It was the scent of a fragile truce, and for me, it was the moment I could finally take a proper breath. What's going to happen to the house? Susan finally asked, her voice timid. Beside her, Michael sat with his eyes still fixed on the floor, saying nothing. I gently set my own mug down and looked from one of their faces to the other. Then, I offered a calm smile and gave them my answer. I want a family's now, not a piece of property, you see. I didn't need to choose my words carefully. I didn't need to dress them up. Because, inside myself, I had finally found my answer. They were silent for a long time. I'm sure 1,000 different thoughts and feelings were crossing through there minds in that silence. But I didn't ask for anything more. It was enough. I never went back to that house again. I didn't return the key, but I no longer had a reason to go back. A week after that incident, I quietly started the process of moving and purchased a small condo of my own. It's located near the daycare center where I worked for over 30 years. The morning air, filled with the sound of children's voices, reminds me of a younger version of myself. The condo is small, but it has a little south-facing kitchen. Every time I stand in it, I think to myself, I still have a kitchen, which means that the feeling of wanting to cook for someone is still alive and well inside of me. It's in an older building, but it's close to the train station and the daycare, and most importantly, it's more than enough space for one person to live quietly. A few days after my new life began, I was sitting on a small stool in my kitchen, quietly watching the steam rise from the kettle on the stove. To be in this little kitchen, cooking just because I wants to cook, without worrying about anyone else, I never knew such simple days could feel so precious. The thought just floated into my mind. Trying to match someone else's tastes, always watching someone else's expression, I had believed that was the shape of family, and I had lived that way for so long. But now, I was warming up a bowl of soup just for myself, with no one watching, with no one to criticize, just slowly enjoying the aroma of the broth and vegetables. In that moment, I thought to myself, even when you get old, there's still such a thing as freedom. I felt something deep inside my heart begin to unwind. Beyond the quiet steam, I felt as if I had finally found my own time. One day, an old colleague of mine called. Would you be willing to teach a simple little cooking class at the daycare center? She asked. I answered immediately. I would be delighted. And so, every Wednesday, I teach the children how to make a simple vegetable soup. We start by soaking the dried herbs in water. Can you smell that? I ask them. Doesn't that smell nice? It feels as if the days when I used to talk to my son and my grandson just like this have come back to me. One afternoon, a little girl said to me, ever since I moved into this condo, I've started looking forward to the mornings. When I open my curtains, I can hear the cheerful voices of the children from the daycare center across the way. Teacher, wait for me. Every time those voices drift over on the breeze, a little warmth blossoms deep inside my chest. Living so close to the daycare, I can always hear the children. That sound alone feels like it washes my heart clean, over and over again. I spent more than 30 years of my life standing in the kitchen of a daycare center. Those little smiles gave me strength. On days when I made mistakes, on days when I was exhausted, they gave me the courage to face the next morning. That's why even now, just hearing the sound of children's voices makes my heart feel light and free. It feels like I can meet that younger version of myself all over again. I didn't run away. What I chose was a place with sound, a place close to life. I didn't want to live in loneliness. I wanted to live surrounded by kindness. What makes me feel this way are the sounds of little shoes on the pavement, the sound of laughter, and the memory of being a mother that still lives inside of me. Grandma Evelyn, today's soup tastes different from the soup at my house. It's so warm. I smiled and replied, that warmth, you see, it comes out when you make something while thinking about the person who's going to eat it. I don't need to be called mother anymore. But I believe that my mother's hands can still be of use to someone, somewhere. In the evening, as the soft light streamed through my window, I picked up a needle and thread. On the table in front of me were small, colorful squares of fabric. Stitch by stitch, as I embroidered the children's names, I smiled to myself. I was sewing little aprons, one for each child, with their name on it. No one had asked me to do it. But when I imagined their happy little faces, my hands just started moving on their own. I suddenly remembered making a little bag for Michael just like this, with his name embroidered on it, so many years ago. I don't really remember him ever saying, thank you, but it made me happy all the same. Then and now, I just love making things for other people. You don't need a qualification to be a mother. It's not about blood ties or your position in a family. As long as you have a caring heart, I can always be someone's mother. Being able to think that way now makes me very, very happy. One day, I was walking past the daycare center nearby. "Grandma," a voice called out, seeming to come from nowhere. I stopped in my tracks without thinking, and I almost instinctively called back. "Yes, dear?" Just like I used to. I caught myself and let out a little chuckle. I thought maybe no one would ever call me that again. But my body still remembered. Even if it wasn't his voice, I suppose I'm still a grandma after all. When I realized that, a strange warmth spread through my heart, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Even though my role in my own family had ended, maybe the kindness inside of me was still looking for a place where it could reach someone. And now, it's here. Even if it's just for a passing moment, by responding to a child's smile, I can become a grandma again. From time to time, messages from those two still arrive on my phone. "Where are you now?" "We want to see you." I haven't replied. But every time I read them, my chest tightens. But it's not a place I can go back to anymore. I left my role as mother behind in that house. In its place, in this new life, I am starting over as Evelyn, just myself. One evening, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there was no one there. But at my feet, there was a single envelope and a drawing that was clearly done. By my grandson. "I want to eat Grandma's food again." The clumsy letters were written next to a drawing of a big plate of spaghetti and meatballs. I couldn't stop the tears. But even as I cried, my heart felt a little warmer. "It's okay for me to still be a mother, isn't it?" I whispered to myself. And I put the drawing up on my refrigerator. Even if we can't go back to the way our family was, I believe that the love, the feeling, is still connected somewhere. Believing that, I pick up my kitchen knife again today. At night, alone in my quiet room, I sometimes look up at the sky and think, someday, at some dinner table somewhere, if the smell of a simmering soup or the taste of a piece of braised fish makes you remember, even just a little bit, the taste of Grandma's cooking, that alone will be enough for me. I no longer hope for an apology or for you to come back. I only hope that I can remain in your heart as a gentle memory. If a day ever comes when you find yourself murmuring, "The food I ate with Grandma was so delicious," at that moment, wherever I may be, I will surely be smiling quietly, because I put my love not into words but into every spoonful of flavor. I was never asking for anything special. All I wanted was to sit around the dinner table together, to laugh and say, "This is delicious." I just hoped those days would last a little longer. That was all. But sometimes, perhaps we don't realize the warmth of something precious until after we've lost it. If you, right now, are taking something your own mother or grandmother does for you for granted, I ask you to stop for a moment and think. Have you ever called someone's cooking disgusting? Have you ever decided that someone was not good enough for this house? And if you are someone who has ever had words like that said to you by a family you once loved, please leave a message in the comments below. I don't need gratitude. I just want to be respected. I hope this story reaches someone's heart. Please share it with others before a warm meal at the dinner table becomes just a memory. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'm sure that something that can't be put into words will reach your heart too.